Hello again. We're going to start the first panel, getting prepared. What are the pitfalls and gaps in upcoming regulations? So please take your seats. And I invite the panelists of the first panel to come up onto the stage. Yeah, you will speak, but please have a seat. And then the moderator will. So yes, thank you. So I would like to introduce Maarten Hove, who is the Director of Technology for the European Network of Cybersecurity, and he will moderate the panel and introduce the panelists. So thank you, Maarten.
Yes, so thank you and welcome everyone. Yes, I think in this cybersecurity forum we've been tracking the legislation for a while now, the NIS2, the Network Code and Cybersecurity. We already had several sessions the past few years. But this year it's really sort of going into force. So really switching from the legislation phase into the implementation phase with the NIS2 that should be transposed by the 18th of October. The Network on Cybersecurity that went into force the 13th of June and where we had a kickoff also on 3 September. So all these legislations are now really sort of turning into force, and it's now up to us also in the industry and government to together implement this and to really make it effective. And I think this is what we want to address in this forum. So I have here a combination from both sort of the government side and industry. I have here Jean-François Montagne, he's the Chief Information Security Officer at the NEDI, and he's also the convener of the E.DSO Task Force for Cybersecurity. I have Jan Osenberg, he's the Senior Policy Advisor at Solar Power Europe. Slavomir Briska, a Cybersecurity Policy Officer at Acer, also very involved in network code implementation. And Philippe Castro-Barignon, a Policy Officer at DG Ener, also responsible for the network code and cybersecurity. So we'll start with a brief presentation from Philippe, and then we have some introduction statement from the other participants. So Philippe, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So as Martin said, I am working in DG Ener in the Commission for on the area of security and safety of supply, and in particular in my case in the area of cybersecurity. The main file that we have been working on recently was on the network code, now going into implementation. And well, I'm happy to be here, especially with the word implementation, because it's really the phase where we are now, not only in the network code, but also in other legislation like NIS2, no? With very upcoming milestones there as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Shall we then go to the other participants? I think everyone can give a short introduction statement. Start with you, Jean-François.
Well, as you said, now this is starting seriously, the regulations, NIS2, Network Code on Cybersecurity, and other one. And one of the, well, it's an opportunity, very interesting to help the whole players of the electricity market to raise their maturity level in cybersecurity. So not only as with NIS1 or previous regulation, topics focused on the DSO, the TSO, and the big generators. Now the new characteristics, it's that the electricity system has become more complex, as it was said just before, and it brings new risks with digitalization and more remotely controllable devices that are used to control the grid, but also used to connect the grid through renewables, through EV charging infrastructure, etc. And those new risks can now be seriously addressed through those new regulations, and also with an homogeneous approach. As with the network code for cybersecurity, we will have a common methodology, and will be the first time that a common methodology on risk analysis will be deployed at a European level.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll then go to Jan.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Yeah, I mean, the new legislation goes a long way. But at the same time, in the solar power sector, we think there's still work to be done. There's still work to be done to address the cybersecurity system to the new system of decentralized generation. For us, of course, the digitalization of the energy sector is an absolute no-brainer. So there are in power plants efficiency gains that can be made, but also flexibility is absolutely needed. So we modeled that by 2040, we can save 160 billion euro just by addressing flexibility needs instead of grid reinforcements. And of course, with the digitalization of these assets, there are new risks. So you didn't need a typewriter when you didn't need a cybersecurity protection when you used a typewriter, but you need it now when you have a laptop. With solar systems, we assess that today the risk is still limited for several reasons, which is one, the majority, let's say over 50% of the inverters connected to the grid today don't have internet connection yet. So this will of course change. The newer devices are commonly connected to the internet. But then all attacks must happen during a sunny hour for a solar system. So that's again, if you want to target a larger area, that's a challenge. But then it's also extremely complex to orchestrate such a centralized attack over a sufficient capacity of aggregate devices. There are different update versions on every inverter. There are different protections for every internet connection of every inverter. So there's really a big practical challenge for addressing such risks. With regards to the solar systems, so there are large-scale systems which are completely different from small-scale systems. So large-scale systems operate very much like a gas power plant. They have dedicated protection. They use SCADA systems to ring-fence the power plant. They monitor all signals that go in and out, and they're really sufficiently protected already. And this is 33%, like roughly a third of the existing power grid. However, small-scale devices operate a lot more like IoT devices. And these, is it okay if I spend some time?
Yes, yeah, please.
And these small-scale devices operate a lot more like IoT devices, and they don't have this OT layer around it to protect it. Instead, they are IT connected to the manufacturers or to the VPPs, and there we don't have the security controls necessary yet, while the Cyber Resilience Act does a big step, of course. Also, the members of Solar Power Europe, the project developers, the OEMs, the VPPs, they have a big interest in ensuring consumer trust, so they take a lot of measures already. So they do authentication measures, they do access controls, but also protection against denial of service attacks, supply chain risk management, continuous monitoring of all these devices. It's already been done by the manufacturers and by the operators of power plants. And then, of course, as you said, we have this world-leading legislation that is coming up, absolutely on top of what's needed. So people from across the world tell us that they're looking to Europe to innovate the legislation. So I said before, we need some additional steps, and as we prepare for solar to become the majority of the power generation in Europe. For small-scale devices, as said, the Cyber Resilience Act does a big step to, even for low-cost inverters and low-cost products, that these have sufficient security controls. So with the implementation of the Cyber Resilience Act, a lot will be done. However, what we regret a bit is the risk category in which inverters are being placed or not being placed. So we think that inverters must have increased conformity assessments procedures via the Cyber Resilience Act, so be listed in Annex 2. We need a dedicated standard for inverters to make sure that we have a more harmonized and more strict requirements. We need a dedicated standard for the IT connected operation of these inverters. That's the third thing. We need the users of the inverters must take a more active role. They must set the right passwords, and they must also do the security updates on their inverters, which has not always been done today. And lastly, we need a centralized body that monitors all commands coming from a centralized entity going to the inverter to make sure that whatever happens on the VPP side or on the OEM side, there's a body that ensures all commands are within the capabilities of the power grid to monitor, to handle this. I think these are the main steps.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we're going to switch to the government side, starting with regulators. Slavek?
Still good morning. So that was quite content-rich. I'm not sure if I'll be able to match that. So first things first, we at Acer agree that supply risk management is probably one of the focus areas, if not the #1 focus area, in terms of potential threats and vulnerabilities. You know, there's the issue of a supplier of critical services, critical ICT services becoming unavailable. There's the risk of a supplier of your critical hardware, software, just producing suboptimal hardware vulnerabilities. And there's the risk of malicious attacks, potentially via a supplier. So, you know, things like the CrowdStrike event. And so this is, and it's not so easy. The things that seem logical, rational, such as, you know, include various clauses in your contracts with suppliers. You know, make sure that your supplier reviews the code, make sure that your supplier has vetted staff and all the rest of it. You know, things that are obvious to us, they are not quite as easy to implement in practice, because a lot comes down to, the brutal reality is that a lot comes down to negotiating positions. And when we have a stronger negotiating position, it is much easier to impose our clauses on our contractors. And those of you who represented companies ever in negotiations and negotiate with the big guys, with the guys who have you know, a really strong market position, perhaps you're locked into them. It's not quite so easy to get all of those clauses that the code foresees to be implemented, to be captured in that contract. So we understand that on the ground it will often come down to the negotiating positions. And the second one is the issue of lock-in. Again, the brutal reality is that you know, often the market is fairly concentrated. You work with one supplier, you're compatible with their systems, with their hardware. So it's not quite so easy to just go, well, if you're not complying with this new standard, if you're not implementing this, we're going to switch tomorrow. That's not quite how it works. And that's why it is, the code is exciting to us for a number of reasons. It's not so much, I mean, one thing is the things that it will implement, that it will harmonize, but more importantly, it's how stakeholders, how the private sector, how we will work together to overcome these difficulties. And also for us at Acer, of course, there's we are an economic regulator. You know, we are not like ENISA, we are not cybersecurity focused, we're an economic regulator. So for us, the cost, the expenditure aspect is really interesting, because cybersecurity, just like many other ways of life, of economy, are, you know, they are slave to money, they are slave to economics, to expenditure. And for us, we will do our best to foster this efficient spending via benchmarking and assisting the NRAs. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Philippe already did the kickoff. So we'll start with some prepared questions, and then we'll go later on to the audience and see if there's any additional questions. And I'll start with a question to Philippe. I mean, we see at the moment several legislations aimed at risk management being launched at the same time. So already mentioned the Network Code and Cybersecurity, the NIS2, they're basically starting at the same time. We also have the Cybersecurity Act touching on risk management, so there's a lot happening. And the question is sort of, how do you see these work together? How can they complement each other? But also, how do you avoid sort of redundant tasks, redundant reporting requirements? How to make sure that they don't interfere with each other?
So yes, this has been since the very beginning, actually, of the network code. Also, one of the key concerns is to make sure that when we produce new legislation, there is no duplication and redundancies there. So, and this through the consultations, which is the main mechanism to identify areas in legislation that may not be so efficient or redundant, then through consultations we can get a view on that already during the writing, the drafting of the policies. But this is, I think, not enough. Basically, when we come to implementation is when really we see whether there are these type of duplications that you were mentioning, or things that are not working. And here, the message that I wanted to pass today is that there is no legislation that by drafting, by wording, is foolproof. So all of them, you can implement them in a way that can be redundant with other things. And this is unavoidable because it's the way we interpret a legal text. So for me, what is really now important, looking at the network code, but also the NIS2, is that this phase of implementation is what I think is the most interesting part, also for experts working on them. And mechanisms exist, and I will just touch on that right now, but mechanisms exist to exchange. And I think this forum today, especially the organizations that are hosting us here, the key mission is that, no? Is sharing information, exchanging information, creating links, and discussing. And this is my main, I think is the main tool and the main safeguard that we have to ensure that legislation will be implemented efficiently. And by efficiently, I don't say perfectly, so there will be a lot of things that will probably not work as we could wish in the very beginning. But if it's good, it's already probably enough for the moment. If we look at the network code, actually, what is the network code? When we look at it and we focus very in detail on each provision, then we see obligations, we see tasks. But if we take a step back of the network code is a governance mechanism. It's a mechanism to exchange among peers, among entities in a structured way. So to get to a design of methodologies for which the main actors here, the main experts, will be able to contribute during the drafting, contribute during the reviews. So the phase of design, there will be a phase of consultation, making sure that what those experts more or less have considered as the appropriate way of doing risk assessments in this particular sector, no? And in this particular subsector of cross-border flows. This is also somehow aligned with other actors that may be a bit farther in the grid, but still have an impact. No? And we have here Solar, no, as a representative. It's farther away from the E.DSO, but still, and will become a major actor, and the impact of incidents in cyber attacks in the solar part, in the PVs, might have a big impact on the transmission system. So all of them need to participate in this process, and the network code and other legislation is a way to get them together in a structured way so that they can exchange through different forums. We have the mechanism in the network code, the mechanism in NIS. We have expert groups. We have all these forums, no, the ENCS, EE-ISAC, where you discuss internally as well. And this is, for me, I would say, the main tool we have to get to the best possible drafting first and the best possible implementation second, which is the most important part. No, so, in my view, I'm talking now as policy officer in the Commission, who can best know how to implement than those that are operating those systems. So when I look now to the effort, and I follow as close as I can, no, the process to identify which are the critical processes in the industry, no, for cross-border flows of electricity. For me, this is already a very good example of how those experts get together to think, what are we doing now in our industry that has an impact on cross-border flows of electricity? This inventory of what we are doing for that and getting an agreement on what is important for that is already, for me, a huge success. And this is the success not of the code, it's the success of the people that are looking and working through it. So just to conclude, no, is that how do I see it? Well, I see that as long as we have this active contribution, and when I say active, it's really active. It's not going to expert groups and listening, but really participating, responding to consultations, if possible, for example, in network code, voluntarily starting to implement some of those measures. Because this will give you also the opportunity to feedback to those that are drafting those methodologies. By doing this active contribution, then I think the result will be as good as it can be today, which is, I would say, the closest to perfection that I can say, no? And that's, I think, is a role of I repeat, no, but the organizations that are today hosting this event is one of the key roles that you have, sharing and feeding up these type of discussions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it fits very well with the sort of the goal of today, talking about the implementation, that it's really up to us as a community now to turn the legal text into something that really works and really helps to improve cybersecurity. So I think that's a huge opportunity also for all of us today here to make something that works really well. Looking also at implementation, so I would like to ask some of you also, what do you think are the highest priorities? So starting with Jean-François, so what do you think highest priorities are in the implementation, and how can we ensure that the people who have to implement it, the operators, the entities, have the necessary skills and resources to sort of address these priorities?
Okay. First, maybe to say that we, as DSO, I'm representing the E.DSO association. As DSO, we bear a responsibility. It is maintaining the system running and operating, and this is the basic for us. And of course, we do care about cybersecurity and about risk management, but we also don't have an unlimited budget. So there is a clear need to prioritize the action, the implementation choices in a reasonable way. And you asked me about the priorities that we need to address to start. And I would say first, we need to identify what are our critical systems, IT and OT systems. Not only OT systems, it was the scope of the previous regulation. Now we know that all our systems may be concerned, but it doesn't mean that all our systems are critical. So we need to identify, explain, and adopt a risk mitigation approach in order to secure what really must to be secured, what needs to be secured, and then deploy this risk analysis and protect the system. So first, identify and protect the system with adapted means, adapted resources, and then also the rest, you mentioned it, to share information when we detect some flaws, some attempt to attack the systems. But basically, we'll have to again face with some prices issue also. You mentioned this will be the theme for the next roundtable this afternoon. The supply chain, addressing the supply chain risk, it's quite important and necessary, but we will all have to have this in mind, that each part of the supply chain will have an extra effort to do to cyber secure its part, and this is what we want, but we will have also to deal with the impact on the prices on the supplier side that will be linked with those regulations. And this is why the balance is quite touchy, because we need really to adapt our implementation strategy to what is critical, important, and with this overall view of the need for the electricity system well functioning.
Okay, thank you. So I hear risk assessments, I hear information sharing, supply chain, and one of the main challenges is indeed the economic factor, price and cost. So I think that's a good point to go over to Acer as the economic regulator. I think Cybersercurity, same question. So what do you see as the priorities, and how can we make sure that entities have the right skills and resources for them?
So we might be an economic agency, but on this occasion I concur with the gentleman here who said that the risk assessments would be one of the priorities, if not overall the number one priority under the code, because the way the network code is designed, for the most part, is that there are dependencies, right? So in order to carry out your regional, your member state risk assessments under the code, you need to have the union-wide risk assessment under the code carried out first. And in order for that to be carried out, you need to have the risk assessment methodologies to be developed by the ENSOE and the E.DSO entity and then approved by the competent authorities. So just logically, if you look at how the various processes, the various governance processes and deliverables under the code are structured, we concur with the fact that development of robust and understandable risk assessment methodologies under the code for the union-wide risk assessments, for the member state risk assessments, and for the regional ones is probably the priority as far as the general processes are concerned. But it's not just the expediency, but it's also developing a robust risk assessment methodology that reflects the metrics already used by the industry, that reflects the thresholds which are already used by the industry, which constitute sensible reference points. So it's the robustness, the correctness, the sensibility of these risk assessment methodologies, and for them to be understandable, for them that stakeholders can actually follow them, that they make sense to them, because these things are not straightforward. These are not generic risk assessments. They are industry, they are sector-specific risk assessments. So it's important that any competent authority, anyone takes them, reads them, and it makes sense. You can go step by step and go, yes, this makes sense. This truly reflects the impact. This truly reflects. I understand the risk impact matrix. We can absolutely use that as the template. So it's the robustness of that matters to us as well. And then I think your other question was on resources. Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, disclosure, we had a conversation with that about that last night with friends, and there is no silver bullet. And one of them said, and this is one of the principles that I thought I would convey today, is that try to address the low-hanging fruits first. Try to cover the corners, the Pareto principle. Try to implement basic things like authentication, basic network protection. If nothing else, try to have the basics in place. And these will typically cover 90%. They will address 90% of, well, if you can quantify the risk, they will really, sometimes by spending less, but really covering the main things, the most essential things, the most essential training. You can cover really the majority. If the resources are an issue. Also, understand that we do not expect that there will be many companies, hopefully none, that will be starting from scratch. We expect that the vast majority of the companies already have a lot in place. We expect that the entities that will eventually be designated as the critical impact entities, we expect them to have the vast majority of these controls in place already, compliant with the prevalent standards. So understand that you're not starting from scratch. Carry out your gap analysis and work from there. Simplicity, draft processes and policies which are understandable. Over-engineered academic information security policies, processes are not helpful. It is not helpful when the staff comes back to the information security officer asking to decipher, no pun intended, of the policies, processes, what they're supposed to do. So simplicity is your friend. And lastly, if you think that there will be little time, especially considering your human resources, start early. And I think the provisional period, which is happening right now, with the provisional impact indices, with the provisional processes, with there being a provisional list of candidate entities, that gives an opportunity to start early, without those actual legal obligations under the code yet for the entities. But the code says, strive to progressively apply these standards and the controls, which should be published by June, if I remember correctly, by the ENSOE and the E.DSO entity. So start, if money and time and resources are an issue, just spread it out. Start early, adopt these standards, test them, try to figure out how to apply them as cost efficiently as possible. That would be our advice.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, so as indeed Slaven says, saying, I mean, for network code, we will very shortly get, I think, the first provisional documents out. The first one is in October. and that will allow entities to see if there are higher critical impact, and I think that's really also something that you can prepare in advance, and that can really help there. Going to priorities, I think both from sort of the private as from governance side, I think the main priority was mentioned was risk management. And I think one of the main risks is also coming from nation-state actor. I mean, in the previous presentation, you already mentioned, for instance, the cyber attacks in Ukraine or around Taiwan, and these could spill over to Europe. And we've seen, I think, with for instance, the Patriot attacks in Lebanon, what a sort of a capable or a well-provisioned nation-state is capable of. And what we're basically asking some of these regulations also to have private companies, DSOs, producers, help to sort of counter these nation-state threats. And I think the question I have, so do they really have the necessary capabilities, both of the skills, the resources? Do they also get the necessary information about threats, because that can be quite sensitive? And also, how do you deal with the cost? Because you have to take extra measures that you may not have to take if you're just dealing with criminal threat actors. With a nation state, you really have to go to the next level, and there are real costs with there. And we see, for instance, DSOs, they're very strictly regulated on cost, while on, for instance, the producer side, it's just a commercial business, and they have sort of, they have to look also at their profitability. So how can we sort of, as a community, deal with these nation-state actor risks? I will start with Jean-François.
Well, it's a matter of application of the current and coming regulations. I mean, the Resilience Act will be quite important and interesting for protecting critical and physical OT assets like smart meters. It was mentioned before, control centers, SCADAs. But to make this work properly, the law, the regulation must be applicable. And this is one of our concerns, that there are several business models that are currently developed to deploy new generation resources. We had recently an example in France of a wind farm which SCADAs was hacked, and we had a nice skull on the screen. And I also heard some of other companies that were also mining some bitcoins. And what is behind? If because we couldn't understand that it was possible, and I explain you what is behind. One wind farm, one company, very small capital, and you got somebody behind owning thousands of wind farm and PV power plant, but the liability remains to this one unit, you know? So it's a way to avoid abiding law and regulation. And it's a business model indeed. It's a business model to accelerate the development of those new businesses, but we are worried about the proper protection of those kinds of assets that for which we can ask to be compliant with the regulations. So this is one of our specific concerns. And so this is not a nation-state issue, but if there is a generic flow among those kind of market parties, this generic flow can be exploited. A really large number of plants or assets or devices can be compromised. And well, this is what we really want to protect against with those with this network code, as you mentioned, Slavomir. So first thing. Second thing, and I will finish with that, there is in nation states threats. Our CTI experts mention also hacktivism. And just recall a few months ago, in France. One day before the Olympic Games started, there was a massive physical attack. So it wasn't a cyber attack, but a physical attack on the switch point for National Railway Operator, the SNCF, and it triggered a big mess in all the country for traveling. And it means that not only very prepared nation states can harm the operation, it can also happen from any kind of activism for any kind of reasons. We have heard from a new trend after the low tech, the no tech trend, and with some people that are promoting the use of no electricity and even the possibility to destroy this kind of installation. So this is a threat that is also important to have in mind. And how can we protect against that? This is the same thing at each time. We need to be very efficient in flow, vulnerability management, threat detection, incident reaction, and coordination between authorities, with national cyber authorities, with ENISA, with the EE-ISAC association, to share information as quick as possible, and thanks also to the new regulations like the network code and the NIS2 regulation.
Okay, thank you. So I think your first concern was really also about the renewable energy and the new parties you see there. I think it's good then also to go to Solar Power Europe and to see indeed how you from the renewable side, are you prepared to handle such attack, and what should we do to ensure that you're ready to mitigate these risks, specific for nation states?
Yes. So what I hear is the questions about compliance. That's for us. That's an absolute no-brainer. So whatever the company that are in our membership, wherever they are from, if they are a manufacturer or a project developer, it's crystal clear that every device has to be compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act, with the NIS2, with the network code, but also up the value chain, up the supply chain of the devices, so the components of the devices. And there's really no debate about discussions. It's crystal clear that, and the manufacturers say we have to do that, and they are absolutely clear about this. At the same time, we take these nation states' risk very seriously. So it's not only about Vladimir Putin paying a bunch of terrorists to hack the inverters, but we also consider threats by nation states via their local OEMs as a potential scenario. We consider the scenario extremely unlikely, but we have measures proposed which still mitigate this risk. It's extremely unlikely because it's essentially economical suicide for the OEM. So if a nation state would ask the OEM to shut down the devices, consumer trust will be eradicated immediately, and it's the end of the operations of this manufacturer in Europe. And given that Europe is for solar is a huge market, this will probably be a significant blow to the entire company. But at the same time, we see that with the dependence on Russia, on gas, we have to take energy security extremely seriously. And therefore, we worked quite a lot on this. We had weekly calls with all relevant parties in Solar Power Europe to develop a technical solution for this challenge. And technical solution knowing that scenarios like this exist in other sectors. So for example, for communications, Joe Biden uses an iPhone for communication. And this iPhone, the President of the United States uses an iPhone manufactured in China, used with components from China. And of course, the US intelligence is not stupid. This phone will be sufficiently secure. And the technical solutions that we're proposing is to have a monitoring layer between all centralized control and the inverter. There's a monitoring layer. Whenever simultaneous commands for a large fleet of devices is being issued to the inverter, there has to be a body that monitors these commands, whatever they are, updates, shut off, grid code configurations, whatever they are, and is able to intercept if they can cause an anomaly. We've modeled this from the Australian approach, which is quite advanced on this, but also from the automotive sector, which has similar issues. And we see 3 possible ways to implement this. It's still in research phase. We are very open to collaborating with and fine-tuning this to make it work. But 3 steps. So first one is the OEM operates a SOC, a Security Operations Center, and all commands are being channeled through this SOC. And then the SOC has to be operated in Europe or in another secure legislation. And then you have a government body which looks at all these commands at the SOC level, which has access to all the commands at the SOC level, able to monitor everything and able to intercept everything if there's a problem. That's the first approach. The second approach, instead of a SOC, you have private entities who monitor, so private companies, like VPPs, for example. You have private entities which monitor all these commands. These private entities would be subject to very strict regulation from Europe, and they would, of course, have to be hosted in the EU or a sufficiently secure jurisdiction. And the private customer can actually essentially choose which party he wants to monitor these commands. That's the second approach. The third approach, which already exists today on the market, is that you have a dedicated small device, can be software or hardware, connected to your inverter, which again channels all the commands coming from the centralized body in this little device, making sure that there's no problem, no cost by an update or by a command from a centralized body. So these solutions exist, and it's up to us now to implement them.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we've now heard sort of from the private sector what they think about the nation-state threat. So we'll switch now to the regulators, so Slavomir. So yeah, how do you think, how do we ensure that these entities have the capabilities to address nation-state risk, and also how do we ensure that they can cover the costs, especially for regulated parties?
But with regards to the first bit of your question, are you referring to the existing or upcoming regulatory measures, or
That could be part of the thing. So I mean, maybe the existing regulation is enough, or do we need something else to ensure this, or do you think it's covered already?
Well, I can think of several sources of, let's say, regulatory measures. The existing ones, of course, we have the NIS2 with the basic requirements there at the objective level. We have the network code for cybersecurity. With the risk management and sector-specific risk management methodologies and controls to be developed. So, but everybody's aware of that. And then we have the upcoming legislation. Of course, we have the Cyber Resilience Act. Cyber Resilience Act will be major in that it covers the manufacturer perspective. It covers the product, the system, the component, the hardware and software perspective, and this naturally will protect against attacks. Not all of them, but having robust, strong, secure components, software, hardware. It's a fairly essential element of protecting yourself, and the Cyber Resilience Act in its annexes it introduces systems, let's say, of more horizontal, generic application, but it also, if my memory serves me well, it also now refers to the smart metering gateways, I think, which was added earlier this year. So we have the CRA as the upcoming legislation is concerned. And finally, last but definitely not least, and arguably when it comes to protecting oneself against major attacks with cross-border effects, there is also the Cyber Solidarity Act, which is upcoming legislation, and this will if I remember correctly, this will establish the so-called cyber reserve, right? The EU cyber reserve, where actually private sector entities such as consultancies, incident management companies will be procured, will be kept in reserve, so to speak, to then be reached out to in times of crisis, in times of major cross-border cyber attacks, major outages caused by cybersecurity attacks. So in terms of legislation, and that's a major one, and this also brings me, I think, to the second part of your question, which was on cost recovery.
Yep.
So let's start with the EU Cyber Solidarity Act and the Cyber Reserve. I mean, there the cost recovery is quite straightforward. I mean, these companies, these consultancies or providers of components, services, incident management services, recovery services, backup disaster recovery services, these will be procured. This will be commercial now. Of course, it will be under the EU procurement rules for transparent, cost-efficient procurement. But this will be remunerated with a profit margin. So there's the cost recovery element there, and such a flexible cyber reserve at short notice, remunerated, could prove quite influential. It could be quite a game changer. So that's the first thing. Now, in terms of cost recovery in a strict meaning of this word, under the network code, of course, we have a provision where the TSOs and the DSOs will be able to recover the cost of compliance with the network code within the network tariffs. This could be included in the network tariffs if these costs are proportionate, efficient, and reasonable. I think these were the three terms. Either way, the point is that you're not spending more than you should be reasonably. And so this will be the other element. And the NRAs will assess these costs. And this is one of the things that excites us at Acer the most, is because we are naturally an economic regulator. And as mentioned in the beginning, cybersecurity is no different from many other disciplines in that a lot comes down to money. I mean, we talk about how important it is for citizens, for consumers, but really it's about money. And if an entity sees that addressing cybersecurity risk is much more expensive than the consequences, plus the risk of potential fines, the incentives are simply not there. So we understand that it's about money, and that's why we are excited about the network code really makes a statement in its provisions. It says we recognize that it's an economic matter. We recognize that it's a cost efficiency matter. We need to talk about how much it really costs, or how much it should really cost to procure cybersecurity products, solutions, components, services. So, for example, we'll be carrying out benchmarking exercises. The NRAs will be carrying out benchmarking under the code to really develop the views and understanding of how much these things should cost. So that's as far as cost recovery is concerned, as long as these costs are reasonable and efficiently incurred.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll then go to the last topic before we go to the audience question. This is more about sort of the renewables, other parts that we discussed. I mean, if you look back maybe 20 years, I mean, the grid was basically controlled by large parties, large DSOs producers. So if we would just secure those large parties, we would be done. And I think we have a lot of experience already securing them with the NIS1 directive. But we see the electricity grid has changed. I mean, we have a lot of renewable energy, a lot smaller, also renewable parties, home generation, we have aggregators, we have EV charge point operators. And I think one of the changes in the NIS2 and network code is that all of these parties are now also pulled into scope of regulation. And I think the general question, I mean, we already touched on it a bit, was do you think these parties are a real risk to the electricity system? I mean, are they large enough to really cause cybersecurity risk to the whole European system? And if so, how can we ensure that they sort of implement appropriate risk management? And I'll start with renewables, Jan.
Thanks a lot, Martin. No, crystal clear, yes. We have around 300 gigawatt of solar installed in Europe at the moment. And 100 gigawatt of that is ground-mounted installations, so protected by SCADA systems. 200 gigawatt are rooftop systems. Of those, maybe 100 are connected to the internet at the moment. But of course, we have 50 or 60 gigawatt installed each year, and the majority of those are internet connected. If we look at the thresholds for that grid operators have to operate, it's 3 gigawatt. So we see we are significantly above this threshold. And also individual OEMs who have like large market shares can be above these thresholds. But at the same time, when we speak to our members, there's no discussion about costs. So about cost efficiency, or that's really nothing that had come up. it's crystal clear that we have a responsibility and we have to secure the operation of the power plants. And it's really across the entire value chain, and all of our members agree on this, that there's no discussion about cost. We have to make sure it's secure. That being said, we still see that, that being said, going a little bit more into the details, so we have the Cyber Resilience Act, which does a lot to protect this actually, and which will ensure that all the members have a harmonized baseline on how to meet the requirements. But we need to go further to further increase the level. That's the position of our members who really want to increase the security level, which is we need a dedicated standard which goes beyond the IoT standards. It's really a vertical standard to ensure that all DERs, not just inverters but also storage, EV chargers, and heat pumps, have sufficient security controls. And this standard, we have examples from the United States. We have UL 2941, which can be copied or should be copied, and which we should also adapt in Europe. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is we need a standard for the IT-controlled operation of these assets. So centralized control via the VPP or the OEM for these assets. And what this standard would cover not only the device itself, but also the connection to the network. So the connection to the network adapter, to the network itself, but also to the OEM. So looking at the APIs, looking at all interfaces, looking at the O&M channels, and really making sure that the entire operation of the control is standardized, and that manufacturers have a way to benchmark how good their security measures are compared to other companies and to what other companies are doing. And we think this is a critical step, which would be within the Network Code of Cybersecurity, but also within the scope of the Cyber Resilience Act. We should use this opportunity to make sure that we bring our devices up to speed.
Okay, thank you very much from sort of this renewal perspective. Maybe I'll switch now to Jean-François to look at the DSO side.
We E.DSO are already invested in cyber securing our assets, and I really welcome. I really like Jan's commitment for securing and cyber securing at the best level possible those new assets, and it's an exciting time indeed. This change of the electricity systems, it's huge. It triggers investments everywhere, and the cybersecurity remains at the heart of the security of the system, the European electricity systems, and I like it when I see that this is well and properly taken addressed, and I also like that Acer Slavomir when he said that they understand the cost issue, and this is a question of balancing risk, costs, the overall, and having a global level of maturity that is rising. Not only some players, some GSOs, some TSOs that are exposed, but everybody is exposed, and we need to have this systemic level of maturity.
Okay, thank you, Art. So maybe to close the topic, we'll go to the Commission. Philippe, so how do you see the risk of these new parts, renewables, aggregators, EV chargers, and how can we ensure they have good risk management?
And for me, I think the point on those new devices is that we increase the digital surface a lot. So we have now a lot of new things that are linked to energy, but it could be anything else. It could be water, it could be they are digital, and because they are digital and they provide services to the operators or to the end users or to both, then they have the inherent risk that we have in any other sector that is already digitalized. I take the example of telecom. So telecom, 30 years ago, or roughly more than that, there were big switches in rooms, and then there was just cables communicating with frequency on voice. Then they came with all the packetizing of voice, and then all the data. And we have now services in mobiles. For me, making it exaggerating a bit, an inverter is just another mobile. It's just another mobile with different services, but just another mobile. And do I know which are the services that are going to be an inverter in 10 years' time? I don't know that. I don't know that. I don't know what type of risks this may bring into the system, because we talk in energy a lot about blackouts. But blackouts are probably one of the smallest risks in the energy grid today, because there are a lot of other controls that are industrial controls that will cover up, will mitigate possible digital risks there. However, there are many other new that coming, and that may impact me as an end user. And just another, maybe a bit of a silly example, but if we look to the financial sector, to the online e-commerce, what was one of the main factors that slowed down the uptake of e-commerce at the beginning? It was just the fact that if I was using my credit card, I could be somehow hacked, or my credit card could be impersonated, and then I didn't want to do e-commerce, online shopping, because I was afraid that, because many others were being lured into that, then I would not do it. What if I have an inverter at home producing electricity, and then after 3 months I understand that most of the generation of this electricity has been cached by somebody else? And nothing to do with the generation. Generation is perfectly working there. My DSO is perfectly getting the electricity, but somebody, somewhere, is changing the ID in the database where it says that I produce X megawatts, for example, of energy, but it changed to an ID of somebody else. And there are many, many other type of services that probably I cannot think of, and maybe some of you in the audience and in the panel know better, but there are many type of new services that, just because this is a digital system, regardless of its linked to energy or not, in this case, this can create and generate a lot of creativity in services, and a lot of creativity also in how I can make or profit from the system to my own interest or interest of others. Could be reputation damage to other companies. I think it was mentioned before, no? You don't want, probably you will not use your own company in your country, no, like you say, to hack. You could use somebody else so that you could create a reputational damage to that company instead of yours. So all this is because it's digital. It's not a question of energy as such, but it's digital. And then, by the way, we have energy on the side. No? So this is where I think that if we take the learnings from other sectors, we may have probably walked already a good path of all this before. No?
Okay, no, thank you. I think it's a very interesting idea, and maybe something for a future conference to also look at the other sectors and what we can learn. I think we have about 10 minutes left for audience questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and then state your name, affiliation, and the question.
Thank you, Luis Cunha from E.DSO Mainland Portugal. I have indeed 2 questions. The first of all, I think, is for Jan. So you mentioned some kind of middleware, just to be able to control any kind of comments that we would like to send to the inverters. I mean, in that case, how do you see the way forward to have a common way for DSOs or TSOs or system operators to send the comments? Because you are going to have a lot of different manufacturers out there. And if I remember well, there was a very interesting project funded by the European Union that ended last year, or beginning, yes, it was already this year, Interconnect. It was about ontologies to communicate with appliances and have a kind of standard. And in the end, what happened is that we will have 10 or 20 clouds, each one belonging from a different manufacturer. And if a DSO wants to send a comment or interact with any of these devices, then we will have to dialogue with 10 or 20 different clouds. So in the end, interoperability is not really happening there. So this is my question for you. The second question is for Slavomir. So I think it's very interesting that you mentioned this. In the end, what matters is economics. And this is economics versus the risk that we are dealing with key infrastructure. So I would like to know a little bit more if you are thinking about any particular kind of framework to have this trade-off between investing in a critical infrastructure or retaining some investment because the risks are not enough.
Okay, thanks. So I think we'll start with Jan with the question on sort of the interoperability of this middleware layer.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So yeah, I would like to play this question back because interoperability with grid operators is all we want. We look at the network code for demand response or the implementing regulation for demand response. Trying to standardize communication with grid operators is really all we want. Yeah, we've been trying to get to the Commission to increase the scope, to make everything possible to harmonize the communication to grid operators, and I think Germany is advancing now. The Association of Grid Operators, which just basically mandated E-Bus as a communication interface, communication standard to grid operators, and that's something that we would like to see across Europe. What we don't necessarily want is something on the national level which takes 10 years to change. So we are in a dynamic industry. We would like to see interoperability now, but if we see there is a better standard coming up or there are new services coming up, we don't want to be locked into a standard for 10 years. So having something that's dynamic, that can dynamically change as it is implemented already in Germany now, or they're starting to do it now, is exactly what we want. We'd be happy to develop this. We've only been looking at the network code for demand response at the moment, but this can also be adapted to cybersecurity measures. So, of course, also within these standards, but also going beyond.
Okay, thanks. So I think there's an interesting discussion for the lunch break. I'll go to Slavomir for the question about the economics and the framework that you see could be used there.
Yeah, so I will respond in a very straightforward manner. So the code is quite straightforward on what will need to be implemented. It says when you read the provisions of the code, you will see that the critical impact entities will have to implement these controls, and then the high impact entities will have to implement these controls. Like right now we have the control objectives, but then the actual controls will be developed. So it's not like we will be developing some new framework, some dedicated legal instrument that will tell you, what you need to implement. I mean, you at the end of the day, let us be frank, you will have to comply with the code, with the terms, conditions, and methodologies and plans developed pursuant to the code. What I meant was to be most straightforward about it was that, as mentioned, the code, similarly to previous codes actually, foresees that the TSOs and DSOs will be able to recover the costs of compliance with the code, which are proportionate and efficiently incurred. Now, what we are doing right now, what we started recently, is we started the analytical exercise to develop a benchmarking guideline. And because the NRAs will have to carry out a benchmarking analysis after that guideline is finished. And we think that there will be an opportunity, this benchmarking analysis will provide an opportunity for the NRAs to collectively increase their understanding of what efficiently incurred could mean, what could be the various potential prices in various operation regions, what could be what metrics for effectiveness could be used. I mean, they would increase. I think there's a chance, there's an opportunity there for the benchmarking exercise to provide intelligence, additional information, know-how collectively to the NRAs to then carry out these cost efficiency assessments. Ultimately, the code is very, very clear that the cost efficiency assessment will have to be carried out on a case-by-case basis. Ultimately, every entity, every TSO, DSO will submit its costs to the NRA. The NRA then can ask for more information. So, ultimately it will be cost case by case, based on the actual submissions, based on the data. But we think this cybersecurity benchmarking analysis, which is fairly novel and multifaceted, when you look at the various provisions of the benchmarking article, will provide quite an opportunity for us to understand how much things should cost and as to their potential substitutability. So that's what I was referring to.
Okay, thank you. I think there was a question
Manuel Sanchez from Fleischmann Hiller. You are talking of many things and about cost, risk assessment, benchmarking analysis now, different perspective. But I'm wondering a very simple activity, like a picture. What could be the three top topics for implementation of the network code, and what could be the issues of those, and what could be the actors to make something else? For instance, you say ACER is going to make or advise the national regulators, or DSO, TSO should do this and that, industry should do this. I mean, could you make a synthesis about that? Because otherwise it's a really very dispersed discussion, which non-ending. But really, the picture today for, let's say, next month, what are the key points? For instance, one I can give it to you in my opinion is the nomination on the national authorities to develop these methodologies, etc., etc. Could you make what are the top three topics? Yeah, it's more the administration, the governance.
I take it. Volunteering. I ask for volunteers, so I should be the first one to be one.
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
I have one. I think there is one that is I think it needs to be as pragmatic as possible. So when we are looking out to methodologies, let's not create yet another risk assessment methodology that is generically looking at threats and risk and vulnerability and so on, but really look to what is the process, for example, just to give an example, is saying, let's identify the process that is going to control the frequency in the cable. This is very concrete, and then there is an action that can be taken there. What is the benefit for me of a pragmatic approach here is that, first of all, we are not duplicating anything. Because nobody is telling anybody today how the frequency in a cable is being controlled. It's rules within the TSOs, within the ESOs, but in terms of cybersecurity, there are no rules there yet. So if you produce something like that, then it's going to be useful. It's going to be useful for the entity, and it's going to be useful for the authorities. When I discussed with the cybersecurity authorities, and it was long discussions also during the draft of the network code, then there was always the concern, but why now a network code? Why are we going to create another risk assessment methodology? And they're right. So if we are going just to create something that is already there, then it's not going to be not going to be usable. Now, if you give them a kind of a checklist saying, this is my process in electricity, when I'm transmitting electricity in my cable to my peer on the other side of the border, this is my cable, this is my frequency, this is my sensor, and this is what I want to protect. And then you uniquely identify which are your processes, your assets, and then this is usable by the entity, by the operators, by the SOC in the entity, but also for the authority, because they are going to say, okay, I go there, if I need to inspect, for example, or I need to ask for conformity, then I know what to look at. Because in most of the cases today, what happens is they come, auditors, I've been an auditor before, you come, and you say, okay, give me all you know, all you have about cybersecurity there. And then the auditor is going to pick there, here and there, and say, now where I'm going to find a gap, a hole in the process, because it's my job as an auditor to do that. Now, if you have a pragmatic implementation, you have a kind of a checklist, maybe not perfect, but good enough, so that the operator knows what to do, and the authority knows what to look at, then it's a win-win for everybody. So really, to be as pragmatic as possible in this process, risking not to be perfect. I think we can live with that, but being good.
Okay, thank you very much. I see we're already 5 minutes over time, and so I think it's time for, sorry. Yeah, we're close, right? So I think it's time for the lunch break. I want to thank all panelists very much. I think it was very interesting to get the perspective of new legislation, both from the DSOs, renewables, regulators, and also the Commission. So I found it was very interesting. I hope you've also found it interesting. So with that, I'll hand over to Charles.
And thank you very much to Martin, and thanks to all the panel. Let's have a hand for the panel. And indeed, now I invite you all to lunch, which is in the same place as the coffee break.